On the work session. Again, 13 July 2009. All items are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. It is one item. Again, Councilmember Cavalier is not with us this evening. And we have one item on the agenda, and that's to receive a briefing on joint facility use. And Paul Louisi, I didn't see him. See?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll just start it, and we'll find out where Paul is.
Probably thought it was 5 o'clock.
What we are wanting to talk to you about tonight is the project that we've been working on for some months now, and that is a joint powers agreement between the City of Avondale and the City of Goodyear that will enable us to do joint powers agreement services out of Fire Station 183. This is prompted by the fact that prior to the economic slump that we've all encountered, the City of Avondale was looking at building a new fire station and police station up on Estrella Mountain Community College's property, and that would serve Litchfield Park. They were going to join in with Avondale and help finance the improvements to that. What Charlie McClendon and I have been talking about is why don't we do a joint service out of Fire Station 183, which would provide services to both Litchfield Park and Avondale in a closer proximity than actually the fire station at the new Estrella Community College would be. Charlie was very interested in that. That has grown to the possibility of why not do a joint powers agreement that would allow us to do a fire district type service that would provide fire and emergency medical services to an area that conceivably someday could enlarge itself to include other cities. So other cities, Avondale, Buckeye even, Litchfield Park, other cities could join into this joint powers agreement, and we could provide services through that joint powers agreement to these other agencies. What this would require is the implementation of a joint powers agreement that would, in effect, create a separate board to administer the new agency that's being created, and it would provide that fire services and emergency medical services would be provided to those communities very much like they are today. Because when you call for a fire service or emergency medical, you don't know which station from which city is going to get there first. Because of the unique Phoenix agreement that we all have in the Valley, we have, in effect, a major joint powers agreement in effect already. What this would allow us to do is provide these services, and what would have to be negotiated is different funding mechanisms and what those funding mechanisms would be. I've worked for 9 years in Fort Collins, Colorado, under a joint powers agreement. The Poudre Valley Fire District operated in a 250 square mile area, and we provided emergency medical services and fire protection services to that 250 square mile area under this joint powers agreement. There was a fire district that taxed separately, and they paid to the Poudre Fire Authority X dollars that they raised through their property taxes. We, the city, paid our property taxes directly to the fire authority, and it all worked very well. There was a 5-member board, of which I was one member. The mayor was another member, and it operated the joint powers agreement. In Vancouver, Washington, we instituted such a joint powers agreement mid-year through my first and second year as being city manager, and we merged with Fire District 5 and the City of Vancouver into such a joint powers agreement. So we took over, I forget exactly what size it was, but it was 100 and some square mile area beyond the city limits of the City of Vancouver. And we enlarged that and provided the services to the citizens of the City of Vancouver as well as the citizens out in Clark County. It all worked very well. That's what we started exploring here, and what we're looking for tonight is your agreement that we could have permission to do such negotiations or such discussions with the fire agencies in order to provide these services. It looks like we've had two gentlemen come in who probably are with the Fire Department of Orange County. Is that correct?
One.
I'm sorry. That's Paul. Paul?
There's Paul.
We've already gone through a briefing, Paul, so if you could take it from there and introduce the guests that we have this evening.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry about being tardy. Tonight we have the mayor from the city of Tustin. His name is Doug DeVert. He is the Orange County Fire Authority Board Vice Chair. And also we have Council Member Craig Scott from the city of Laguna Hills, who also serves on the Orange County Fire Authority Board since 1985. Okay. Tonight we're going to talk about the potential joint use of the IGA with Avondale and also the joint powers agreement and fire authority concept. With this IGA, we're going to be looking at the joint use of Fire Station 183, which is Litchfield Road just north of Thomas at the community park. What this does is it eliminates the need for Avondale to build another station on Dysart on the campus of the Estrella Mountain College, which would be just north of Thomas. Also allows to serve the city of Litchfield Park, and Avondale will still proceed with the construction of the police and college components. So there will still be a public safety type of a center that will be there. Currently, some of the advantages for Avondale: it avoids a $2 million in capital costs for them, reduces projected personnel costs, allows them to hire personnel under the SAFER grant, also improves service delivery to the northwest area of Litchfield Park, Avondale, and Goodyear as well. And then new funding, approximately $160,000 from the Litchfield Park agreement will go to Avondale. More importantly for us, improves service delivery into that area, and also provides a new funding resource for us, approximately $340,000 annually that will be given into us. The one thing that we'll caution with now, as everybody knows, the economic downturn, Litchfield Park did not fund this for this fiscal year. So we have to be concerned about, as we go forward in the next fiscal year, if they don't fund this, would we still be interested in this type of cooperative agreement? Obviously, the advantages to Litchfield Park: avoids a $2 million in capital costs, improves their service delivery immediately, and also provides them access to the automatic aid system, which they do not have at this point. We provide aid to them by mutual aid. So at this point, they're not into the automatic aid system. Some of the key points: Avondale will staff a 2-person EMS unit. This is not an ambulance. It will be a rescue type of vehicle that will be staffed out of Fire Station 183. Fire and EMS service to Litchfield Park under the current Avondale Litchfield Park IGA is scheduled for July 2010 to start. You'll have a 2/3 revenue pass through from Avondale to the city of Goodyear, and that was that amount that I had talked about in the previous slides. And then obviously the fire chiefs together will have to work to get appropriate operating guidelines in place. A lot of that means kind of some of the behind-the-scenes work, talking about station roles, talking about the different cultures that exist between Avondale and Goodyear fire departments. Also, shift times. We change shifts at 7 a.m., they change at 8 a.m. So it's a little bit of differences there that we would have to work through, but in the end, we would all work as professionals in this. The other piece to this, talking about the Joint Powers Authority, I just wanted to kind of bring you through from more of a global perspective of what a JPA would be and how it would affect us. Some of the key points here: would be to establish the steering committee and such other necessary committees to conduct a joint powers feasibility study. And obviously, we would need to bring in some consultants that had some expertise in this consolidation to help guide us through this. Prior to beginning the analysis, to determine the interest from other jurisdictions in participating in this, and also some cost sharing by those other entities. There is talk now amongst other West Valley agencies, as many as 12 are interested in this type of a JPA. So there is some interest out there, but it's very, very premature at this point. And obviously, we would allow us to explore other interim joint operational or administrative activities as appropriate and where they fit in different organizations. The JPA, the power is provided under ARS 11.952. Right now, we would have to investigate this a little bit further with the legal department to get a full ruling on this to make sure that there is legal feasibility to be able to determine this and go forward with this. Would all obviously create a separate entity. Cities would contract with the new entity for fire and EMS services, so a little bit different than how we practice right now. The governance, as I talked before, we have 2 members here from this board. It is an independent board, typically with representatives appointed from the council, elected bodies, and make up the determinant through the JPA. Currently, there are some agencies that are using this. Orange County Fire Authority is one, which was established in 1995. There's 22 cities that are in that system. The Poudre Fire Authority in Colorado, that was established in 1981, and I believe the city manager had some experience with that, up to 9 years serving that board as well. And then Unified Fire Authority in Utah as well is another one to talk about. And at this point right now, it just has not been done in the state of Arizona, even though that the ARS does allow for it. Talked about our special guests that are here. Some of the advantages: creation of an independent entity solely focused on the provision of fire and EMS services, a potential for more efficient deployment based on the broader geographical perspective, so more globally, better resources in better spots. More efficient administrative oversight would avoid duplication in the different agencies as well. Creates a more innovative deployment environment, and then also a potential for future cost avoidance. However, I will caution you that initially that cost avoidance is not there. A lot of that comes through attrition as the organization or the authority matures. So up front, it's going to be very difficult to avoid costs. Some other advantages: economies of scale. Obviously, we're going to have to combine 2 budgets, or even more, depending on how many organizations join in, to provide a support structure with an emergency service focus and understanding. So one focus, many missions, but there is one focus in what we do. Significant amount of front-end work. Obviously, like I said earlier, the need to bring in a consultant that has consolidation expertise in this would be very viable up front to help us. No direct control by the council or city managers over the fire service. The board then would have control over them. Perception of loss of the community fire department. You've given us great resources to be able to deploy the current model that we have now. We feel that model is very efficient and works well. So it would be a big change for the community and for the citizens. A greater management burden placed on the fire service administrators. Obviously, now at one point where you're an operation that has 100-plus people would now probably go over 200, maybe even larger, as organizations pitch in. Some of the keys to success that we focused on: multiple of questions that still need to be answered. This, again, is very premature in its infancy stage, so we will still need to answer many questions as we go forward. Focus needs to be on service delivery to the citizens. Utilize intergovernmental agreements and committees. Take a task force approach as well with this. Involve all stakeholders with this. Don't reinvent the wheel. We have to be open-minded and capitalize on organizational and individual strengths. When we talk about the stakeholders, we have to make sure that we're involving the citizens, obviously council, staff, and obviously our labor groups that will be impacted by this. Causes for failure in the past, barriers, turf, power, politics is one of the big ones, control, obviously, and money. Timing is always important on these as they go. Personnel will feel threatened, so it's important that we bring them on early to make our discussions, get those moving forward. Personnel agendas for members as we move forward. History, any resistance to change in a poor process. Feasibility analysis, consider obtaining consolidation, expert assistance, a systematic approach to this. Identify critical benchmarks. Establish a reporting system. Keep people informed. As with any change, it's important that we keep people informed. Deal with the obstacles, and then evaluate any existing systems out there, like the Orange County Fire Authority. Right now, there is, again, the interest from West Valley. The fire chiefs are meeting from a larger perspective. We have our next upcoming meeting on July 22nd. We'll be involving labor in those meetings as well, and some experts that will be attending that meeting to answer some of our questions from a fire chief's perspective. And then some of the research and input was provided by Emergency Services Consulting. At the end, I guess we're looking forward for two things. One would be, should we move forward with this on developing an IGA with Avondale for the joint use of facility of Fire Station 183? And then secondly, to begin a comprehensive joint powers agreement, fire authority feasibility study as well. Now I'll take any questions.
So you can have the agreement with Avondale strictly on the first bullet?
Yes.
Okay. Would any of our guests wish to speak? And Frank Scott, you'd like to say anything? Frank's from Avondale, by the way. So welcome.
I think we're just here to answer any questions if the council has any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.
Mr. Mayor, I should just acknowledge that from here they're going over to the city of Avondale. They're having a work session tonight also on the same subject. So we're trying to coordinate all of our efforts.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, it's open for public comment. Any comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, it's open to the council. Let's start over with Councilmember Osborne. Do you have any questions?
I was writing if
Did you get your mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. This has got me. This isn't working, by the way, so it's got me all messed up. All right. They mentioned briefly how the taxing would be done, the property tax of funding this way. Could you go into a little bit about that, or is that still up for discussion?
That's, I think, still up for discussion.
What about the other cities?
How they did that, their funding of it.
Are you talking about the other agencies?
Cities who've done
Well, the way we did it at Fort Collins was the fire district still levied their property taxes, and they contributed that into the pool for the Poudre Fire Authority. The city had its set levy for the property taxes, and they contributed that to the fire authority. And then the fire authority had the responsibility of operating the budget within those parameters.
So did every city have the exact same levy percentage?
No, we had the city of Fort Collins, obviously being a developed city, had a different our tax rate than did the surrounding farm areas, but it was a process worked out over the 27 years that they've been in existence.
Okay. Go ahead.
And it's still premature to.
Well, I understand.
I mean, we have not even discussed those items. So.
The other question I had was that
Microphone. Your microphone.
sorry, is the board has.
Not turned on.
Thank you. I'll get this right. That the board has all the control, and it takes it out of the city council and the city manager's hands. What about when we do budgets?
I can only speak from the standpoint of the Poudre Fire Authority. I don't know if of the Orange County, if that's different, but the board hires and fires the chief. They did contract with the city of Fort Collins for all of our personnel policies and things like that. The budget was approved via the joint powers agreement by both the fire authority, by the fire district board, and the city council. But in the 9 years I was there, that was never a problem. So it was ultimately approved by the governing bodies. They were both elected bodies. And then the authority had to administer that budget and told the chief what they could or could not do.
I guess that's kind of an answer to sprawl, isn't it?
Another question I had, you spoke that there would be upfront costs.
Yes.
And you mentioned timing. Obviously, upfront costs and timing in
Yes.
our budget is an issue. So
Absolutely.
can you go into that a little bit?
Well, I think just as you said, I mean, the more we look into this, we're going to have to see how it impacts the budget, how it can, it's going to look to everybody. So I think timing is imperative in this. And I think a lot of that, it kind of stands in your hands as well when deciding the budget.
Okay. One other one. Would there be some kind of, Georgia went into it a little bit about not having control, but would there be some kind of yearly, say, scorecard or yearly input from council stating that, you know what, we want to continue this way? I mean, is there ever an opt-out clause? Is there, you know, those type of things?
I'll let the experts.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Craig Scott, member of the City Council in Laguna Hills, Orange County, California. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. If I might address a number of the issues, maybe it would be helpful that you placed on the table. Yes, indeed, there is a movement of authority with a joint powers authority from, in our case, county control, 5 members of Board of Supervisors, in your case, cities, to an elected board. That is, the members of the board come from city councils, 1 from every city council, to our 22 city represented, 2 county member boards. So we have a total of 24. What happens to the city manager in the process? In our board, it's very important that we rely on and continue to have the help of our city managers. They serve on a technical advisory council or committee, which has been very helpful to the board and to the fire chief as he administers the affairs of the board. There is 1 representative from each city. In terms of opting out, we signed up originally when we formed the Joint Powers Authority for a 10-year term. The notion was we wanted to have a commitment from our cities. We have now passed that mark and recently had all of our cities renew for 20 years. So you can certainly set it up in any way that works. You can have an opt-out. But we really wanted to be assured that the group that was joining us, originally some 18, 19 cities, now 22, were committed for a period of time that made sense in terms of our budgets. And I probably lost some of the other issues that you were interested in.
How's your taxing?
We really have 2 ways that we fund the fire authority. Through property taxes for most of our participating cities. And for some, it's on a contract basis. So property tax is allocated to the fire authority on behalf of the cities. And then some, including Mayor Davert from Tustin, who's here this evening, his city is a contract city, and they pay on a contract basis. You may want to hear from him on that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from him on that because that's basically Litchfield Park.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Doug Davert. I am the mayor of the city of Tustin, California, and also the vice chairman of the board of the fire authority. For my city, it was very simple. We had a standalone fire department. In today's dollars, our budget would have been somewhere in the $7 to $8 million range. Through the fire authority and the economies of scale that presents, we were able to reduce our fire budget in today's dollars to $5.5 million. And we're strictly a contract. We write a check. We're called a cash contract city. We don't allocate any property tax directly.
And then what happens when you have to negotiate on the money end of it?
Well, we have, as Mr. Scott just indicated, we did sign up initially for 10 years. Our cash contracts do have an opt-out period at the end of every 5-year increments. The opt-out is a negotiated opt-out between the local jurisdiction and the authority. That does come up every 5 years in our contract. We've never had any reason to even open those discussions.
Joe?
Yeah, quick question. This would be something I understand looking long-term, but you still have the issue with Avondale you may be talking about. The agreement to put one of their units over there at the fire station there at Thomas. What's involved in kind of moving forward on that? Because you had mentioned there's a difference between mutual aid and automatic aid. Could you just kind of refresh my memory on what the difference between those two are?
Automatic aid, the dispatch center is in Phoenix. So 911 calls go through the local PSAP, and then they get sent down to Phoenix Fire. 26 communities are involved in automatic aid. They pay a fixed dollar amount each year to Phoenix Fire to dispatch them. And then once you're in the system, you get the resources of the system. So, for instance, if we had a first alarm fire requiring several units here, and the fire continued to grow, we could continue to bring units in. Just for example, there are 206 engine companies in the automatic aid system. We can have access to all 206 of those engine companies if we needed to. Mutual aid is an agreement between town to town or city to city, and basically they have to call through the system to request us individually to respond, and then we respond our resources to them. So it doesn't go automatically. Automatic aid also sends the closest unit. There's no boundaries in automatic aid, so a lot of times Goodyear units will go into Avondale. Avondale will come into Goodyear and provide service in a seamless fashion.
So currently, right now, Avondale and Goodyear is in the automatic aid, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if there was an agreement between Avondale and Goodyear at this point, the question I have is at the station at, was it Indian School and Litchfield Park and Litchfield Road and Thomas, any major modifications going to have to be made to put their equipment there, cost-wise? Have you looked at any of that?
No, there would be very limited equipment, just a little bit of upstart. But for the most part, that station has the ability to hold 8 personnel. Has enough apparatus space to be able to respond out of there. So
you have enough space right now that you
Correct.
can move them over minimal cost, and you'd have a revenue stream coming in as well.
Yeah, and I guess we just have to think about if Litchfield Park doesn't decide to fund this at some point, are we still interested in pursuing that?
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Antoniak.
Yeah, I would, I guess, contemplate that in the IGA discussion. It seems it's always made sense to me since Litchfield Park approached Avondale, especially in that area between our communities. It's made a lot of sense to me to utilize the already existing infrastructure in our fire station. And if there's a way for us to do that, and there's a way for us to make sure we're compensated for it in the sense that it keeps us whole and keeps the service at the level it is and higher, I'd be supportive of that. I think it's best for all 3 communities. If Litchfield Park can fund it, great, even better. But if there's a way for us to move on that, I'd be supportive of moving down that path on the IGA. The feasibility study, I guess I would want to learn, and we're starting to learn this tonight, but
Yes.
before allocating budget from our budget for a feasibility study, one would want to know what the scope of that looks like and
Absolutely.
how much that might cost before before I was to say yay or nay.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is again more of a global discussion of what a JPA does and is. If we had to go further, we would come back before you.
Yeah, I guess things that I'd be thinking about in terms of, a JPA within the West Valley, do we talk about another taxing authority? I mean, a lot of discussions
Absolutely,
yet to take place. I don't know if another taxing authority is the most appropriate way to go, or if it's budgets within our current existing, I mean, we already talk about CFDs and many, at least in Goodyear, many other taxing authorities, and all of a sudden you start having 7, 8, 9, 10 different taxing authorities on your tax bill.
Goes back to the timing.
Orange County, Orange County, right? You went from a county fire service, so it's probably to more of a localized fire service from what I just heard, correct?
Sort of.
Okay. Were you state fire supported
Some
before?
of our cities were part of California Division of Forestry State Fire.
Okay.
Some of our cities were part of that Orange County Fire Department, and cities like mine had a standalone fire department. So it just, some of our cities, we had 3 different models, I guess, basically, and all those cities now have come together in this joint powers agreement.
Okay. And the Colorado example was from, did you all start that from cities to a regional effort?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
The city of Fort Collins and the surrounding county areas in conversations talked about a better model to provide fire services, and this was the model that we struck on in '81.
Okay. I guess for me, thinking about it, coming from a county down to a localized level would be, I don't want to call your system simplistic, because I'm sure when you guys negotiated this back 10 or 12 years ago, it was nowhere near simplistic. But I think of the local control, and I mean, you talked about, what kills these things is politics and a variety of different circumstances. And, we have an awful lot of local control, albeit we try to meet a mutual aid requirement. But when we start talking about county and working within rural, metro, and a variety of other circumstances, it's a tough road to hoe.
Yep.
I guess I'm a bit of a skeptic, but maybe cautiously optimistic about talking about it. Okay. I would want to ensure, if the money was coming through the local taxing authority, if we were to talk about a JPA, that from a funding standpoint, we were able to have control over that, or some sort of discussion. I mean, I think we've demanded a higher level of service. Avondale has demanded a higher level of service than maybe some other municipalities around us that may not expect as much. And so we get into equalization issues and a variety of, I expect a certain amount of fire service and EMS service to show up at my house when I call, and I'm paying taxes to do that. And I wouldn't want our service to be watered down because of a JPA. So,
correct.
Anyway, I think hearing a scope and hearing about what cities and what municipalities would be involved in that scope and hearing about how you might move that forward and coming back to us a second time would be my desire. Okay. Before we were to fund
Yes.
a study.
Okay.
Councilmember Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Gentleman from California, in your original negotiations, did you have to face any type of labor issues?
Yes.
And how did you resolve that?
I think the following is accurate. The union had very close access to the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors and had a great deal of influence over those 5. Necessarily, as our board took shape and we have now over 20, it is more difficult for the union to influence the board. You can decide if you think that's a good thing or not a good thing, but the reality is that they don't have as much control or influence as they once did. They're very much on the scene and participating in all of our deliberations. We hear from them all the time, but certainly we had to be concerned to assuage the union that we weren't going to cut jobs. We weren't going to cut wages, benefits. It's been since 1995. We never have. We've only increased all of those things. There are more firefighters now than there were before, but certainly we had to work with the unions to persuade them that those results were going to come and that the effort wasn't about scuttling the union. I hope that's somewhat responsive.
It does. But do you have labor representation on the board?
No, we do not.
Yeah, why is that?
The board consists only of members of city councils. and the two county.
Why is it? I agree with you. Why wouldn't you want a representative on the board? Did you have one of the union? Is that what you're saying?
I think, sir, it's nothing more than our history. The Board of Supervisors had total responsibility for fire service. We, as a subsequent board, came on and took on the same responsibility. The Board of Supervisors doesn't have a labor representative per se, and likewise on our board.
So you're
Well, my concern here is that we have, here in Goodyear, we have a very, very good relationship between labor and the city. And that concerns me.
I would hope for you that that wouldn't change. That if you go to looking at studying a joint powers authority, that you would find that your good relationship would continue. In my view, there is no reason that it shouldn't. Open dialogue and good relationships are part of what we hope to continue to foster in our situation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Can tell us the makeup of your board, if you don't. If you don't mind.
I'll go after you finish.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What's the makeup of your board? How many people are on it? How are they elected? Are they appointed?
Sure.
Did you talk about
There are 24 members of the Orange County Fire Authority Board of Directors. 22 of us are city representatives. Each of us comes from our city council. So each member city has one representative. The county and the unincorporated areas are represented by 2 of our 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. So a 24-member board.
And are those weighted, or are those just numerical votes?
Just numerical votes.
Okay.
There was some allusion earlier to some of the issues of what we call equity. You know, you may have a very large city that contributes a great deal to the finances of the Joint Powers Authority. The question is, are they getting a commensurate amount of service? And we have struggled with those issues. We have largely resolved them, to make it very simplistic, by saying we're less concerned about those issues. Do you get a dollar of value for the dollar that you contribute from your contract or your taxes? What we gain as a whole is so worth having that we're ready to deal with some inequity and just say that's the way it's going to be, and we're going to get the advantages. Let me give you a very practical example. Our city of Laguna Hills, 33,000 people. We wouldn't have helicopters. We wouldn't have hazmat. We wouldn't have urban search and rescue capabilities immediately available to us if we weren't part of the Joint Powers Authority. Other questions, sir, on organization?
Well, you addressed. I was curious. I wanted to frame the discussion in terms of how much. I didn't know how big your board was. So.
Mr. Mayor, there was an earlier question. I was so pleased because I picked it up and now I've lost it. Sorry.
Well, I have another one. Can I ask one more? Did you have much pushback from the firefighters on this when you started this?
Yes. I think it, again, is accurate to say that firefighters and the union were concerned that we were doing something that was going to hurt them, that would not be in their interest, that they would not have control that they may have had before. Yes, definitely an issue. I hope that if you were to ask responsible voices among our fire union today, that they would say they're pleased with how it's all worked out. It is not that we don't have our issues. We certainly do. But it's working. I should also say, perhaps to the council member's question, in terms of a composition of our board, we do have issues sometimes with the rotation. The individual city council appoints an individual, and they may be there for 1 year, they may be there for a week, and somebody else may take their place. So it is not a consistent term. The city member decides who will represent them and for how long. And that presents certain issues in terms of continuity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul, let me get to the IGA and the relationship with Avondale, and then we'll do the GPA quickly. But
Okay.
In the COAC, it says Fire Station 183 has sufficient space to allow Avondale to operate a new Avondale Fire Company.
Correct.
Is an EMS considered a fire company?
It's a two-person EMS response unit. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier.
And you said that's what
It's not an ambulance. It's a in the
But
system.
what, the fire company, is that 4 people commonly and a
In a fire company,
and
yes,
a
it is.
engine?
Yep. So the
So
two-person.
Okay, so you got that, is what it says, and it would lead us to believe that we're going to have a total Avondale Fire Company 183. But that's not what your chart said.
Correct.
Well, there's a big difference,
There is a big difference. You're absolutely correct.
which is right.
The two-person is what we consider in the system an alternative response unit. It's a rescue unit that responds out. But the word company is misleading. You're right. A fire company is 4-person.
But it's seriously misleading, I think.
It was not
Because
done.
we're talking money, and we're thinking 300,000, and Avondale gets 160, something like that. But they aren't providing a fire company; they're providing an EMS service for that 160.
Correct.
The fire response apparently is, of course, it's automatic aid,
Yep.
but it's largely going to come from Goodyear.
Correct. It would be Engine 183 would be the first engine company there.
Yeah. Well, that certainly bothers me. You know, going back many years, I think Larry would have remembered this. We argued with Litchfield about how do we provide them fire service, and we were always concerned about them funding a part of our capital cost. And I don't know that that's important today. I'm not going to emphasize it, and that's a big issue then. And this clearly is not going to help us with our capital costs. It's a good deal for Litchfield.
Certainly is.
But, so I'm not, I understand you've got more work to do on this one, but it's a concern to me. What happens to rural metro here?
From what we understand, that the contract will be stopped, and there's some discussion that they may still inhabit the station that they have at Old Litchfield. I'm sorry what the cross street is. I can't remember.
I know where it is.
And there's others discussion that they would look for another station, someplace closer to where they serve. So there's always that issue that will pop up as well.
Okay. If I understand the Joint Powers Authority, and this is the first time I've heard of that really, any detail, the value in that is at least in California, it's reduced their costs of fire service. Is it that the cost to provide fire service to Goodyear is removed from the Goodyear tax to a district tax? So the person pays no matter what. But to what extent is a joint powers agreement, to what extent is that attributed, to what extent does that cause a reduction in fire service costs? If we're providing the service today, and we provide it efficiently and effectively,
Yes.
why does a joint powers agreement provide it also efficiently and effectively but at a lower cost?
I think the dollars are shared over a larger value, but I think our two gentlemen could probably answer that a little bit more intelligently than I.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the economies of scale come in a number of fashions, but using the 12-member example that I think you're looking at, you would have one fire chief and not 12. You would have one personnel department and not 12. You would be able to group a lot of those internal functions and administrative functions together at a much lower cost. In Orange County, we've been able to provide seamless service across all the municipal boundaries, where if we had all these standalone departments, we might have more fire stations grouped together, some a few blocks or even a mile or two apart, where we wouldn't need them otherwise. So that's really, over time, that's where your economies come in.
Okay,
It's
thank
like
you.
a school district, all coming together, getting rid of administrators. I see.
I can see why the firefighters may not like that agreement, really.
Yeah.
But economies of scale is a good argument.
I have a couple of follow-up questions, actually. When we were discussing the firemen and women themselves, a question occurred that Georgia had asked that so the salary scale.
Yep.
Okay. For example, if we were paying more than, say, Tolleson was to I mean, how do you equal that out? I would
I would imagine with the board that would be addressed in that area. But again, a lot of that stuff was going to have to be reviewed and to further look at. But
Okay.
yeah, you're going to have to bring those.
One last question. On Station 183,
Yep.
do you still have the police going in there? Do they still have an area? that they-
No, I believe they don't.
They don't?
It's just
So they don't
Parks and
use
Rec.
it?
They use it for some parking, but
Okay.
the canine officers will use the back as well for training.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Joseph.
Yeah. You stated earlier that this is permissible under Arizona statutes,
Correct.
okay, but then later on you said you'd have to refer to probability. Excuse me. You'd have to refer to legal,
Yes.
our legal,
Yeah,
or the
yes.
various legals.
There was some question, just looking at it further, just to make sure that there's that we can do that. There's no loops that we're not going on.
See,
So
that's what concerns me here. Why are you going through all the machinations of it, and later on, when you find out through legal that you can't do this?
no, sir. That would be certainly one of our first steps, that we would enter into discussions with legal to make sure that we address those even before we took any further steps.
So really, this is going to take another briefing
Absolutely.
to explain it all to us. and-
Maybe a couple.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure I show a few.
Or dozen.
All right.
Okay.
Paul,
Yeah.
follow on the mayor's question. Who's west of the river? I think I know the answer to this. In Avondale, who's the first responder?
West of the river would be 183.
Yeah. So
First
currently,
Station
we're going into Avondale. We're first in on the automatic gate.
Rancho Santa Fe, yeah, those
Yeah,
areas.
okay.
Yep.
So I guess when you come back to us, if you come back to us with an IGA, it'd be important to know if
Street
we're going to be paid
boundaries.
$350,000 a year, or $340, and even though they do have a two-man crew, what's going to be supplemented in terms of that two-man crew maybe first in on the EMS calls and that sort of thing, such that Avondale is served to a level that they want to be serviced to, with us maybe as backup in that situation, as well as how many calls are going on in Litchfield Park that we might be servicing,
Right.
and break that down.
Historically, the calls are pretty low in the Trail Park right now, but we would need to gather more data on that. But to answer your question about the system, yes, there are some system issues that we'll have to look at as well, because once you deploy a two-person response unit, there are certain calls that will get regardless, that they will always get a four-person backup to that. So, yeah, there are going to have some system efficiencies that we'll have to look at as well as part of that IGA. And there was no intent to mislead you with the word company versus a two-man response unit. So that was my oversight on that.
But no doubt, in my perspective, it's an enhanced, albeit maybe not a fire company, it's an enhanced level of service within that area.
Yes, it is an
that
enhanced
183
service.
currently serves,
Yep.
versus, you've got 6 full-time people working instead of 4.
He beat me to the question.
Okay. All right. So discussion, there's no, we couldn't give you authority to move ahead anyway, but you're going to continue to study this?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. And thanks, Frank.
Have fun at your meeting.
Okay, we're about ready to go into our regular meeting, aren't we?
Yes, can we have a few minutes to make sure Frank gets on?
Got a
the line?
call, Frank.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll adjourn the work session.